Welcome to the Quack 12 Podcast, the most official, unofficial Oregon Ducks podcast on the web footosphere. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Quack12Podcast or visit our website, quack12podcast.com. If you like what you hear, please leave us 5 stars on your listening device. And if you'd like to support the show, please visit the Quack 12 Patreon page, where for a measly $5 a month, you can become an official Quacky and unlock hundreds of hours of Oregon Duck content. On to the show. Quack, quack.
Quack, quack, quack. Part 11 of this roster review series for this new conference of ours, the Big Ten. Getting bigger every year, it seems like. Part 10, and we just crossed the halfway mark. We used to be part of a conference where there was 10 schools and full stop at one point. I miss the Pac-10 days, but they're gone. They're dead. It's like Latin, gone forever. Hifliday, how you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good because we got to talk about a school. Well, it's one of my favorite schools in this whole damn world because they made sure that Washington didn't win another national championship. So truly, they'll always have a special part in my heart because I could not have stood for that. Honestly, that would have been just a bit too much. So absolutely could. I'm stoked for their national championship that they just won. And honestly, I'm stoked that Jim Harbaugh is now Justin Herbert's coach. So here's a school that, I mean, we all know this is an absolutely legendary college football school. And now they're a conference opponent. So to cover them, we had to get someone who really knew their stuff. So who else but Jake Singer? That is Jake Singer of Maize and Brew. He's a sports radio broadcaster for WCBN FM. And a TV broadcaster for Big Ten Network Plus, which is something we all have to have now. How's it going, Jake?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you both for having me. Still living on cloud 9, definitely from that national championship. I'm really excited to talk about that Michigan football roster.
I bet. What a flip it was from I don't know, Harbaugh, should we get rid of this guy? He can't beat Ohio State. So we've got a national championship. Pretty amazing run. And like I said, the finale made a whole lot of Duck fans very happy.
It was unbelievable to be part of it the entire season. My whole life growing up, a Michigan fan, and now covering the team has been a complete change of direction, a complete turnaround. And I still literally, I think to my last breath, will be so happy that I was able to say that I was there for the national championship.
Well, maybe one day one of us Duck fans will be able to say that. But let's just get right into this roster, Hifliday, because I'm pretty intrigued.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's start out with the coaching changes. In some ways, it's an all-new staff. In other ways, you could make an argument that not a lot has changed. It's kind of both at the same time. So Jim Harbaugh has left for Los Angeles and taken much of the staff, though not all. Sharon Moore, who was the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach, was throughout much of the year, for one reason or another, actually coaching the team, has been promoted to head coach. The quarterbacks coach, there was sort of an independent quarterbacks coach, Kirk Campbell. He has been promoted to offensive coordinator. He retains the quarterbacks coach remit. Let me stop there and ask, what was exactly the play calling situation in 2023, and what's it going to be in 2024? Who was really designing the offense, and is that going to change in 2024?
Yeah, so Sharon Moore really was the main offensive play caller in 2023. He and Kirk Campbell worked together to scheme the offense. Going into 2024, it's going to be interesting. Sharon Moore hasn't come out officially and said that either he or Kirk Campbell would be calling plays. He said in his introductory press conference that he would most likely not be calling plays, and it'll probably be Kirk Campbell as the one calling plays. But the way they did it with Jim Harbaugh, the way they probably are going to continue to do it with Sharon Moore is it's going to be a team effort. The whole offensive staff is going to be meeting together every single week to discuss the game plan. But on game days, starting with the spring game, we really saw a lot of Kirk Campbell as the one who was making those play calls.
Are you expecting significant, minor, anything at all changes to the structure of the offense or any, like, emphases in the offense?
Definitely. I think it starts with the roster, which we'll get to in a little bit, but with the mentality of this Michigan football team, especially on offense, it's very interesting because you kind of have a tale of two sides. You have Sharon Moore, who's always preached smash football. He was the offensive line coach. He was notorious against Penn State for running the ball consistently down their throats. And then you have Kirk Campbell, who was the quarterback's coach. And he's been working with these quarterbacks. He worked with J.J. McCarthy, but he's also worked with Jack Tuttle and Alex Orji, Jaden Denegal, and he's more known for the air attack. So right now, it's really unclear what the actual identity of this offense will be. I am leaning towards thinking they're probably going to run the ball more than they throw the ball, which is how Jim Harbaugh worked last season. But given that Kirk Campbell will be the one actually calling plays on game days, I can definitely see it going both ways, going kind of a mixture of both. But for right now, I'm leaning towards saying they're going to run the ball a lot more than they throw the ball.
Yeah, it was on first down and pretty much overall, it was about a 60% run versus pass splits. And then I don't know, I've charted the team for the last 3 seasons, and at least in 2023, it's one of the more interesting things about the team. The offense was actually not spectacularly efficient. In fact, it's sort of an outlier in terms of national championship winners, of which I've charted quite a few national championship winners over the years, as well as quite a few runners-up, quite a few semifinalists, et cetera. I've been doing this for a long time. I've charted quite a few teams at this level, and Michigan in 2023 was actually something of an outlier in terms of its offensive numbers not really hitting what in my experience is the championship threshold in terms of the metrics that I chart from, or the metrics that I track from charting, with one exception, which was their explosive pass number. Like, really more than, their defense obviously is what led them to national championship, but if there's one stat on offense that leads them to out the door, it's explosive passing. Really more than anybody else, credit on offense anyway, credit the national championship to J.J. McCarthy and Kirk Campbell's work with him. So I'm interested to see how that aspect of the game evolves. Running backs, Mike Hart is out. Tony Alford from that team down south, or whatever you refer to, I understand that's a fraught relationship, is in. Can you give me the brief and hopefully not anger-filled version of what's up with that?
Yeah, this running back room is stacked. They probably have way too many bodies in that room. Tony Alford, yes, he comes from Ohio State. He's been very successful in his time at Ohio State, developing some really amazing backs like Ezekiel Elliott, Mike Weber, J.K. Dobbins, Travion Henderson. This room lost Blake Corum, but they really have everybody else already in place. Everybody kind of just moves one step up in the depth chart. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see what Tony Alford can do with this running back room. Mike Hart was great at building strong relationships with these guys, knowing their skill sets. Last season, you saw that thunder and lightning kind of combo with Blake Corum and with Donovan Edwards, even Kalel Mullings, kind of the bigger body guy, former linebacker, moving over to running back as a short yardage guy. And now this season, you still have Donovan Edwards, you still have Kalel Mullings, you still have some of your younger guys like Cole Cabana who are moving their way up the depth chart, but you really have guys who can fill all the skill sets of a running back in different ways. And I'm really excited to see what Tony Alford can do with all the different guys in the room, because there's probably, in my opinion, too many guys for this running back room, but I think you can really mix and match it. And while Donovan Edwards is the workhorse, you will definitely see other guys like even Benjamin Hall getting some touches in games and big moments, because they all have something to prove and they all are really, really good at what they do.
I guess my question, we'll talk about the players when we get there. My question was more like, did they see a management problem, and what was Alford brought in to do?
Yeah, it's still unclear why Mike Hart officially really left. Alford, I think, number one, his ability to develop guys was a really big thing. This Michigan team, really for the last 5 or 6 years, has brought in guys, and they've kind of had a system in place where the really good players, their freshman year, kind of get some touches. Sophomore year, you kind of become like the number 2, maybe number 3 back. Junior, senior year, you kind of blossom into the 1A, 1B role. And I think they were looking for someone to complement what Mike Hart was able to do with this team the last few years, and just even take that to a next level. These Michigan backs, have done very well in college. Some of them have done pretty well in the NFL, but Blake Corum right now is probably one of the first ones I'm really excited to see in the NFL. Hassan Haskins a few years ago too, but I think Tony Alford was brought in because he's proven to develop guys into NFL caliber running backs. And in Sharon Moore's offensive system of smash football, you need many guys, honestly, in the backfield that can take the rock and do something with it. And I think Tony Alford was brought in to develop these guys and just really turn them into that next caliber running back that is not just a great college back, but maybe even a great NFL back in the future.
Ron Bellamy, the wide receivers coach, stays in place. Can you explain how I think there's sort of a three-way switch here going on between the tight ends, the offensive line. So you've got Sharon Moore's giving up the offensive line duties to, I think, Grant Newsome.
Correct.
Newsome was, I think, wearing two different hats last year, and Steve Kasula is taking over the tight end unit. How does that work?
Yep. So Kasula is taking over the tight end unit, which used to be Grant Newsome's. You have Ron Bellamy, who stays as the offensive pass game coordinator and the wide receivers coach. Sharon Moore is kind of part of all of that, but this next upcoming season, Grant Newsome is going to stick with just the offensive line. So he's moving from pretty much solely the tight ends coach to now the offensive line coach. Sharon Moore will probably have his head in all the different rooms, but yes, it's a very separate system where you have a guy like Steve Kasula who's there to just work with the tight ends, pass catching and blocking. Ron Bellamy's there to just work with the wide receivers, and then Grant Newsome's just there to work with the offensive line.
The defensive coaching staff is all new. However, Jesse Minter and Rick Minter are both gone. Elston is the longtime defensive line coach, is being replaced by Lou Esposito. The linebacker is being replaced by Brian G. Marie. They had two defensive backs coach last year, Jay Harbaugh and Steve Klingscale. It's going to be just one this year, Lamar Morgan. And of course, the coordinator is being switched out with to Don Wink Martindale, who's been in the NFL for like a million years. Do I have all that right?
Correct.
Okay, quarterback. Losing J.J. McCarthy, who's drafted in the first round by the Vikings. They've got quite a choice in front of them. In the spring game, I was seeing Alex Orji. In the spring game, it looked like they split up the team. It did not look like a very strict, the blue team is the ones, the yellow team is the twos, or anything like that. On the other hand, it didn't look exactly like right down the middle either. So instead, I'm sort of making inferences about like who was in earlier versus who was in later in terms of the pecking order. So earlier in the game, I was seeing Alex Orji with one team and Davis Warren with the other team. Orji doesn't surprise me. I had been seeing him in on like gadget plays last year. And also Jack Tuttle, who was getting a bunch of garbage time reps last year. I believe was being held out with an injury. So, I didn't really get any data about where he stands in the pecking order. I was a little surprised, however, that Jaden Denegal, who was the high 3-star in the 2022 cycle, I didn't see him until fairly late. He was also getting, garbage time reps along with Tuttle. Instead, the guy that I saw early in the game was the walk-on Davis Warren. Is that really what the competition is for the starter in the fall between Warren and Orji? In your opinion, Jake?
No. So it's really deceptive. This team loves being deceptive, and they're going to keep their cards close to their chest until probably Texas in week 2. There is still a 4-man quarterback competition going on right now. I'd say it's probably closer between Orji and Tuttle than necessarily Warren. Tuttle was held up with an injury, but with this depth chart, pretty much similar to last season, Tuttle was named the actual backup. He was the guy that was playing in those actual backup reps. Mm-hmm. Alex Orji still had a role, and he's definitely going to have a role next season. Whether that's the starting quarterback is yet to be seen. In my opinion, I've been really thinking that it's going to be Jack Tuttle's job to lose. He wasn't really expected to come back for a 7th season, but he got the waiver from the NCAA, and he's now back. And because of that, I think with his experience and where he was last season, I think he has a slight leg up. But Alex Orji is an exciting player. Denegal is an exciting player. You have a really cool freshman in Jaden Davis Warren. The thing with all of them is they all have completely different skill sets. Orji is the physical, big, run-type quarterback. There's always been questions about his arm. We saw it a little bit in the spring game. It wasn't amazing, so that's just kind of the big question mark about him. Jack Tuttle is the game changer, kind of the game manager. He'll make his throws. He doesn't have great legs, but he can run. But he definitely has the IQ of a starting quarterback. Jaden Denegal is a pocket passer, really big body, 6'5". He can stay in the pocket, but just questioned about his accuracy and consistency. Davis Warren's been with the program for a while and can kind of do what Jack Tuttle does, just about consistency. And Jaden Davis is this very raw product who should be the starting quarterback in 2 years for Michigan football. So with all of these guys, they really still haven't decided on one or even three guys to cut out from this competition. I still think it's anyone's position to win. But if I had a pecking order right now, I think Orji and Tuttle are tied for like 1A, 1B of the competition. And then you have Warren, then Denegal, and then Jaden Davis. But it just kind of depends on how much time they have, because what they had a few years ago with Cade McNamara and JJ McCarthy, being able to change them on and off for the first 3 games of the season, like a preseason, you don't have that anymore. You have Texas week 2 coming to Ann Arbor, and you probably need a guy by then. And so you just have Fresno State week 1, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they decide to do with that first game, if they split reps or they already choose one, because right now, from what it looks like, they don't have a starting quarterback.
Which QB do you think most replicates McCarthy's skill set?
I think Jaden Davis most replicates McCarthy's skill set.
But he's not going to be ready to go.
He's not going to be ready to go this year, which is fine.
Okay, so of quarterbacks not named Jaden Davis, who most replicates?
None of them are like JJ McCarthy. That's the thing. JJ had this interesting, unique ability where he had a lot of velocity in his throw, and he could make the throws. The consistency, obviously, was still a question. Even nowadays, I mean, they all are bits and pieces of JJ, but they're not JJ. Orji could be a JJ McCarthy if he can get his throws much more consistent, but he really hasn't gotten it to that point yet. Tuttle doesn't have the agility of JJ, but he definitely can throw. And Davis Warren, if you want to say has the closest skill set, maybe is him, but he really hasn't gotten that many reps in his time at Michigan to really show what exactly he can do. And Jaden Denegal isn't fast enough to really replicate JJ's skill set. So of all the guys, it's Jaden Davis who's not really going to play this year. But that's the things I like to figure out is you're not just finding a new quarterback, you're trying to also create a new scheme possibly for a quarterback who's a completely different skill set.
I mean, the thing about JJ McCarthy that there was really 2 things. Number one is I thought that he processed the field pretty well, which is a skill that is like impossible to quantify or even figure out whether the guy's got until you watch the dude play live football against a real defense for like 6 games, which like we don't have that for any of these guys. Even Jack Tuttle, who's been in college since like the Obama administration, for God's sakes, like we still don't have, because like no one ever lets him play football. I don't know why. He's been at like 3 different schools now. And like, I seriously don't know why. I'm not trying to put him down. I genuinely have no idea why this guy keeps coming back for years in school and not playing. But then number 2 about JJ McCarthy was they thought he was really good at improvising plays outside the pocket. I mean, we're going to talk about the offensive line when we get to the offensive line. Thing about McCarthy and kind of folks didn't want to talk about with this, offensive line was that he had to scramble a lot, and the numbers don't really show it in terms of McCarthy's, on the hoof, like running for to pick it up. But he was making throws outside the pocket that dudes shouldn't make, like, throwing back across his body late. And it's like, oh, JJ, don't do that. Don't do that. Oh, okay, that worked out. And I mean, lots of third downs. That's like I was saying with the explosive play number. If you check out, it's the 3rd and long conversion number. Like, it's way higher than the rest of Michigan's stats would predict. And he's buying time outside the pocket and then making throws that shouldn't happen. And it's like, oh boy. I feel like, and again, we're going to talk about the offensive line when we get to the offensive line, but spoiler alert, everybody, there's a lot of changes that are happening on the offensive line. I really feel like that's the other aspect of the equation in the quarterback room that they got to find somebody who can replicate, is the ability to improvise and make plays out of the pocket. Let me ask you that before we move on. If you had to make a pick on that question and that question alone, improvisational ability, Jake, how would you make the pick?
I would say Jack Tuttle. I think I've seen more from him being able to improvise Orgy's first thought is to run the ball. And that's great every now and then. But as you just said, with JJ's ability to improvise, wait till the very last second, we saw against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, being able to stay there and take a big hit and make a big throw. I would say Jack Tuttle's probably the closest to that ability right now. And so that's why, in my mind, as much as the media and everybody else keeps saying, oh, it could be Orgy, it could be Davis Warren, I still say, yes, it's possible. But from everything I've seen, Jack Tuttle is as much that conversation as anybody. And I think his experience being that backup quarterback at Michigan, being a starter at Indiana before Michael Penix Jr., having those game reps in Big Ten games specifically too, which is a whole other beast of a kind of football style as a lot of other conferences. I think Tuttle right now is the best at improvisation.
Okay, running backs. Well, you kind of jumped the gun on me and gave the rundown of this room already. You're absolutely right. It was stuffed to the gills last year. There were 10 different players who got carries out of the running back room last year. I mean, 3 of them were walk-ons, but still, substantial number of carries. They lose Blake Corum, of course, who's drafted in the 3rd round by the Rams. Let me just recite who else. Leon Franklin, who I think was the 4th back in the room or 5th, transferred out. They also lost Danny Hughes and CJ Stokes, also transferred out. They bring back the other 6 guys. The most notable, of course, is Donovan Edwards. They bring back the 3rd back in the room, Khalil Mullings, who you mentioned. He was like a low to mid 3-star, or 4-star in the 2020 class. So he's been around for a long time. This might be his chance. They bring back Benjamin Hall, who was pretty low in the rotation, but as a true freshman last year. And then a few other names too, who I think are just depth pieces, but Tavier Dunlap, Cole Cabana, although I didn't see him in the spring game. He was a true freshman last year. I think he was injured. And then a walk-on got a few carries, Henry Donahue. Did I miss anybody in the returners?
No, that sounds completely right.
They have 2 true freshmen, Jordan Marshall, who was a mid to high 4-star, and high 3-star Micah Kapaana. I think those are the 2 additions. They didn't take any transfers, right?
Correct.
We know what Edwards can do. Everybody in the country who's watching that guy all year, I'm not really interested in talking about him, or the way that like Blake Corum would vulture all of his touchdowns, the poor kid. How do you think the rest of the room plays out? Is this Mullings' year? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's really a lot of opportunity here with this running back room, especially with Sharon Moore's offensive play style from what he's shown in the past. You're right. Donovan Edwards is probably still going to be taking a lot of the carries, but like the quarterback room, all these guys can kind of do something very differently. Khalil Mullings is that short yardage guy. He's a big body. He can kind of just get thrown right in the middle of the pile, kind of like a fullback, but we have a different guy for that. Khalil Mullings definitely can do that, but they also let him catch a few passes, and they also let him, take some carries before 3rd down too. So I think he's a really big threat, especially on 3rd down as a 3rd down back. Benjamin Hall is a lot of fun to watch. He's really shined when he's gotten his moments. He really shined in the spring game last season where he rushed for almost 100 yards, and a lot of people got really excited about him for his freshman campaign. He didn't play a ton. He rushed for 58 yards and 9 carries.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jake. Were they deliberately conserving his red shirt? Is that the reason why he only played in a few games, or did he get hurt?
He didn't get hurt. It was definitely either conserving red shirt or just, again, too many bodies in the room.
Okay.
So it was one of the two, but he did play more than the others of the guys who didn't play a lot, which, again, for the way Michigan has worked in the depth chart for a number of years, it's always about the next man up and just kind of developing guys on the down low until they're ready for the next season. So of all the next guys up, like as you were saying with Cole Cabana, Jordan Marshall, all those guys, I think Benjamin Hall has the best chance of getting a lot of carries because he can be an every down back, which Khalil Mullings hasn't really been able to show yet. So I think he's really exciting. And then you have a guy like Cole Cabana who didn't play a lot in the spring game, which I was really surprised about because he was a 4-star in high school. He had a 5,781 all-purpose yards out of Dexter High School in Michigan. So I thought he was going to come in sophomore year, come out swinging, and he didn't really do much. And again, I think it's because of an injury, but that really, I think, hurt his ability to show the coaching staff what he was capable of in a real game setting. And then you got Jordan Marshall, who is this guy on a lot of teams could be a a starter as a true freshman, but he's coming into this running back room, right, that's 6 or 7 deep. But he also ran for over 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns his senior season just last year and was named Mr. Ohio football. So I like the room. I love it, actually. I love discussing it. I think it's fascinating that all these guys can bring something completely different to the table. But it just depends on, are they going to give Donovan Edwards 20, 25 carries a game? Are you going to divide it up to keep guys healthier longer? That's kind of what they did last year at the end of the season because they lost Blake Corum 2 years ago. They lost Donovan Edwards to some injury time as well. So do you try to divide it up a little bit? I think if they did, Benjamin Hall would probably be the first one up next behind Edwards and Mullings to get some substantial carries in some games.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I only got enough data on three guys, Corum, Edwards, and Mullings, in order to come to serious database conclusions on any of them. I think that Hall and Cabana and are wild cards because I haven't really seen them, but they're talented guys. And Marshall, of course, is a true freshman who wasn't enrolled early, so that's another wild card. I sort of think the ship has sailed on Dunlap. But what's, or do you want to push back on that?
No. I know he's one of my good friends, and I think it's I think he got kind of dealt a tough hand coming in at a really big room. He stayed through all the kind of changes in the running back room, but I would probably have to agree with you that
they have so many options. I mean, it's not even really meant as disrespect towards them. I think it's just like, I'm kind of curious why he didn't transfer out. There's lots of teams that could use a good running back, and just like at his level at Michigan, it's just like, it's hard to break into this room. The thing that's really strange to say about Michigan is, what the data tells me, restricting it to meaningful play only, like, throwing out the garbage time really changes these guys' numbers. Mullings is by far their most effective back, like by far. And it's strange to hear you describe him as a short yardage back because he's the only guy who's cracking 5 yards per carry of the guys that I have. He's the only guy with an over 60% success rate. And in fact, who the least effective back that they had on the team was Donovan Edwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Donovan Edwards' success rate was pathetic. It was 37%. Like if Michigan were perfectly rational, they would stop giving Donovan Edwards the ball. And they would hand the ball to Kalel Mullings, and they would see what these young backs could do. But of course, Michigan will never in a million years stop giving Donovan Edwards the ball. That would be like the least Michigan thing of all time to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think pushing back on a little bit, I think it's about context, and in terms of like looking at Donovan Edwards' career, for example, when Blake Corum got injured 2 seasons ago and Donovan Edwards became that lead back where he was receiving 20, 25 carries a game, he was as explosive as ever. I mean, he almost single-handedly helped Michigan beat Ohio State 2 seasons ago. He was great against TCU when they lost in the Fiesta Bowl. And I think last season he had a lot of expectations to repeat all that, but the problem for him is about momentum. And for him, it's about getting a lot of carries. And when you're behind Blake Corum, who obviously is Blake Corum, and you're not going to take the ball away from Blake Corum's hands unless you need to, it was hard for him, at least what he was saying in the press conferences at times, to just get out there 2 plays and then just go back and sit for like 5. And it's hard to get in a rhythm and get a momentum. So for him, that was tough. For Kalel Mullings, I agree with you that, yes, he's very efficient. It also is about when he's getting put into situations, because he was the change of pace back. You had Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum, who were these explosive players who would try to bounce the outside, use their moves, use their agility, and then Kalel Mullings is this bigger body guy who has a lot of speed, but can also just run right up the middle, and it can catch defenses by surprise. So I think because of those different skill sets and how they were used last season, it'll be, again, very interesting to see how they're utilized next season without Blake Corum there, when Donovan Edwards becomes the one guy again. Kalel Mullings can get a lot more carries, and then these guys kind of are behind him as well. So all of it is still very much up in the air, as a lot of this team is, outside of a few positions on defense. And it'll be, again, very interesting to see what they decide to utilize with these guys, because some are better every single down and others are better, which is kind of getting used sparingly.
Okay, tight ends. We basically saw 3 guys last year, although in different roles. The guy that I would describe as sort of the starter and do-it-all tight end was A.J. Barner. He was drafted in the 4th round by the Seahawks. the other tight end that we saw was Colson Loveland. He was they would have him block, but he was more often used split out as sort of a big Y receiver. In fact, a lot of teams, once you understood their defensive substitution rules, would treat Loveland like a wide receiver. Like they considered him not to be a tight end and would substitute in their defense as though he were a wide receiver. Like that's how wide receivery he is, if that I made up a word. Anyway, the third guy that we would see has basically no catches, but I swear to God, he was playing all the time. And that's Max Bredesen, who was sort of used in a fullback H-back role. He was, he's an effective blocker. I think he's a former walk-on. I think he got a scholarship, didn't he?
Correct.
And then we basically didn't see anybody else. Do I have that recitation correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. In addition to Barner leaving, they also had a guy transfer out, Matthew Hibner, who had been around for a while. We just never seen him. He transferred out, but I think those are the only departures, right?
Yes.
Okay. They bring back guys that we didn't see, or maybe I saw only briefly. The one that I think maybe they're excited about is Marlon Klein. I saw him early on in the spring game. He was a 2022 high 3-star. They also bring back Deacon Tonielli. I saw him early on. He was a true freshman last year who redshirted. He was a low 4-star. Another high 3-star from the 2023 class was Zach Marshall. I saw him early on in the spring game. I also saw a couple of walk-ons. I don't know. I figured I'd mention them as Noah Howes and Jalen Hoffman. I saw them earlier in the spring game than I saw the two true freshmen early enrollees who were both fairly highly rated. Those were Brady Prieskorn and Hogan Hansen. I figured I'd mention that because I figure that the true freshmen are going to redshirt. I was making that inference from the walk-ons playing before them. Before we go any further, what do you think about that inference that the true freshmen are going to redshirt?
Yeah, the way this team is, you might see them get put in some garbage time to preserve their red shirt, but I think with how this room is made up, that's probably the perfect inference for it right now.
So I assume that Colson Loveland and Max Bredesen will simply continue in the same jobs that they had last year. And the reason that I, noted that Loveland played in a different way than Barner is because I expect him to continue in that way and not sort of move over to the Barner role and suddenly develop a bunch of bruising, blocking stuff that I wasn't really seeing out of him in 2023. Or do you think I'm wrong about that, Jake?
No, I think they're going to use him definitely in some more blocking packages. They're going to continue to try to improve his abilities, but his skill set is definitely largely in the pass catching range. And I definitely, I definitely expect them to use him in a very similar light as that Y kind of tight end / wide receiver role.
So who's the new AJ Barner in the AJ Barner role, or are they going to go without?
Yeah, so they're going to do Marlon Klein. Okay. Marlon Klein's going to become AJ Barner. Barner was kind of a surprise for them to see how much production he was able to give this team last year. They recruited him from Indiana, and he just kind of blew it out of the water. He was a perfect kind of blocking tight end who also could pass catch. Marlon Klein, I think, is going to slide into that H tight end role, what Barner was last year. And you could say that Loveland and Barner were kind of 1A, 1B in the tight end depth chart, and that's just kind of how they utilize their tight ends. So between Loveland and Klein, Loveland's going to be, again, using more as a receiver threat. Klein will still go out for routes, but will block. And then Max Bredesen's going to pretty much be that fullback that they were so happy they could find in him last season.
How do you think Tonielli and Marshall fit in?
Right now, probably not really. They're going to be fitting into this team. If the team gets into garbage time again, they'll probably be able to utilize them. The thing is, I know
what about if somebody gets hurt? Is where I'm asking. What body types do they fit?
Yeah, so Tonielli and Hansen are more H body types, like Marlon Klein. Marshall and Prieskorn are more like Colson Loveland. They're more taller, more agile, quicker, and have better hands, so they probably fit the Y. And then behind Max Bredesen, if he ever gets hurt, Jalen Hoffman, Bredesen's been saying he's kind of taken under his wing, again, that other walk-on, and he's eventually going to kind of morph into a fullback role.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk about wide receivers. So this team surprised me a little bit in that during meaningful play, everything was going to 4 guys. Really, of those 4 guys, almost everything was just going to 2 guys. So it was Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, number 1, number 6, who were mostly playing on the outside. And then the other 2 guys were, shorter, built like slot receiver guys. Those were Samaj Morgan and Tyler Morris. And then I know other guys were getting catches, but I swear it was only during garbage time. Roman Wilson was drafted in the 3rd round by the Steelers. Cornelius Johnson was drafted in the 7th round by the Chargers. There was some flexibility, like, you would see Wilson line up inside at times and to mess with defenses because they would foolishly like put a linebacker or something on him. I was just like, what are you doing, guys? But anyway, so those guys are out. In addition to that, they've had quite a few guys transfer out of the room. Let me recite them. Darius Clemens transferred out. He was a 4-star in the 2022 cycle. Carmelo English transferred out. He was a 4-star in the 23 cycle. Christian Dixon transferred out. He was a 4-star in the 21 cycle. And Eamon Dennis transferred out. He was a high 3-star in the 2020 cycle. Have I got all that right?
Correct.
Morgan and Morris, who were, so Wilson and Johnson both got during meaningful play about 60 targets apiece. Morgan and Morris during meaningful play each got about 20 targets apiece. So it's about 3-to-1 ratios there. Morgan and Morris both return. But like I say, I think they're both sort of slot guys. I think they're both kind of redundant with one another, and neither really provide what Wilson or Johnson provide. Like, I don't think you can slide either one of those guys out and have them become the new Wilson or the new Johnson. Let me pause for a second. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think definitely with Morgan, he's probably going to primarily be a slot guy. Morris definitely can play the outside. He played some in high school, so that's probably
really?
Yeah. So that's definitely something that he's also been saying in the press conferences since the offseason started. They've been trying to work him as more like the Z starter on the outside.
Really?
So you could definitely probably see him playing some outside inside stuff, especially if Samaj Morgan has to come off the field. You can move Morris to the slot and bring one of your backups on, which we'll get to, I'm sure, in a second. But right now it's looking like it's going to be Morris and Fred Moore on the outside.
Really? That's interesting. Okay, so Frederick Moore, that's number 3. He got a little bit of garbage time play. I mean, I think he was playing on special teams because officially he's listed as burning his red shirt and playing in 13 games as a true freshman last year. But I don't have him on my tally sheet at all during meaningful play. I don't chart garbage time. I've got too much to do, but I just didn't get to see him at all. The first time I saw him was during meaningful, or was during the spring game when I saw him, playing on the outside. That dude's like 6'1", certainly looks long enough. I'd believe you there. The other guy that I was seeing, and I thought you were going to say, to be perfectly honest, was Peyton O'Leary, who was a walk-on, but I thought was sort of the story of the spring game. What do you think about O'Leary?
Yeah, O'Leary's in an interesting spot because they definitely want to utilize him. And I think, yes, you're completely right. Last season, it was really just those 3 guys they were pretty much targeting at all times. I think they're going to have to change things up completely going into next season because you really don't have a lot of playing time between your 1 through 3 starters right now on the offense. So O'Leary is definitely someone to look out for. He's an exciting guy. They love developing some of these walk-ons that can eventually turn into something. He's kind of an interesting body type, but you're right. He definitely came through in the spring game. I don't see him as a starter right now on the offense between Moore, Morris, and Morgan, but definitely is one of those rotation pieces. You might be seeing this Michigan team using more of a rotation in the wide receiver room next season.
What do you think about Kendrick Bell? He was a mid 3-star in the other. Let me pause for a second. The other reason that I was thinking about O'Leary is that he towers over the rest of this unit. Mm-hmm. They lost a lot of height, especially when Clemens transferred out and Dixon transferred out. O'Leary's 6'3", and frankly, some of the other guys I think are being a little generous in their listing. So the other guy who's pretty tall, and I was thinking about as potentially an option, but then I don't know, I haven't really seen him that much, is Kendrick Bell. He was a mid 3-star in the 2023 class. You haven't really mentioned him. I don't think he got his feet wet at all last year. What do you think about him?
Yeah, he's interesting. He is Michigan legacy. His brother Ronnie Bell was a star wide receiver here at Michigan. Again, these guys, O'Leary, Bell, it was awesome to see them shine in the spring game. It they definitely can bring different skill sets to the table. I think with this team, the fact that they only went out and really brought in like one guy from the transfer portal is interesting to me, believing in that depth with Peyton O'Leary, Kendrick Bell, that they probably have a good opportunity to at least get some playing time this season. But from what we've heard from the coaching staff, they're still probably going to stick with 3 to 4 guys, maybe 5 with Peyton O'Leary as like the 5th right now, but they've really been able to, they like their talent that they have right now, and it is a pecking order. And I think especially with the wide receiver room from what they've done in the past, Kendrick Bell definitely had shown some bright spots in the spring game, but really hadn't done much else outside of that so far. So because of that, I think they're just going to keep trying to develop him and see if they can ever use him in a game situation. But right now, I really don't see him getting any playing time.
Last question about a returner that I have. Well, actually, maybe not.
It's interesting, yes.
Well, there's 2 guys that are, I don't know if returner is the right word for them, but anyway, Dale Chesson, who like initially was playing college ball in 2019, initially went to an FCS school. Dale Chesson. Now I understand they're sort of hurting for bodies in the spring game, so maybe this is the only reason why. But I was seeing him play X receiver with the ones in the spring game. Now, of course, we only saw 6 guys total play wide receiver in the spring game because I think they only had 6 bodies.
Correct.
First of all, sort of a housekeeping question. Is he on scholarship? I couldn't tell.
I actually have no idea. I have to assume not.
Okay.
But I actually don't know.
Is he a serious part of the rotation, or was he just like, oh boy, we need bodies?
That's no, we need bodies.
Okay.
Because after the spring game, they brought 2 other guys in, and I think those are both gonna jump.
Right. Yes. So then on the subject of, is this guy a returner? Question mark. Morian Walker. Let me see if I get this one right. He was recruited to Michigan in 2022, I believe, as a wide receiver, but and he played that a little bit. But then in 2023, they converted him to a defensive back, and he played defensive back a little bit. Didn't think very well. He then transferred to Ole Miss in January, played spring ball with the Rebels, but then transferred back in Michigan, I think because Michigan said, we need wide receivers, Amorian, please come back. So he did, but he wasn't available in spring. That dude's 6'3", so he's tall. I kind of think all he is tall. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, he actually, I think, is more than that now. I think a year or 2 ago, I think that was a great kind of probably description for his skill set. I think they've really tried to develop him. At first, he's playing both sides of the ball, right? He was going wide receiver, cornerback, then it was full-time cornerback. Now he's coming back to Michigan as a full-time wide receiver. And I think that's partly because they've been able to see something in him that they were able to convert him to a wide receiver. I think, honestly, compared to a guy like Kendrick Bell, Channing Goodwin, Dale Chesson, I think Amorian Walker is higher than them on the depth chart. He can definitely play an X that a lot of these guys couldn't. Maybe Peyton O'Leary as well can play X, but I think Amorian Walker is up there as well. So in terms of playing time, I actually expect Amorian Walker to be playing. I don't think he would leave Ole Miss after just committing if he didn't think he actually had a chance on this roster as a wide receiver. So I think because of his height, because of what he's been able to do with his agility, his speed, the glimpses he did in high school, I actually am excited to see what they do with Amorian Walker because I think they have a plan for him or they wouldn't have brought him back.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, it could be that they just run out of bodies, though.
It's possible. I just feel like Amorian Walker goes to Ole Miss in January and then comes right back. And I think pulling him away from that, obviously there are a lot of factors involved, but from what I've been at least reading through the tea leaves is they do see something in him where they actually could contribute. Even if it's just special teams, he could at least do something for this team next season.
The transfer, if Walker doesn't count as a transfer, is CJ Charleston. He was an FCS player. I believe he was unrated out of high school, but he's been assigned a 0.87 transfer value by their scouting services. He was modestly productive at the FCS level. He had like 503 receiving yards last year. I think he came in after spring, so I didn't get a chance to see him in the spring game. Where or if do you think he figures in the rotation?
Yeah, I think he's probably back up at the Z behind Tyler Morris right now. I mean, Kirk Campbell did say before that they recruited Charleston that they did need bodies, as a lot of these guys are, if you couldn't tell the kind of pattern of just they need bodies in this room. They need guys to compete. Charleston was productive, at least at the collegiate level. Yes, it was FCS, but it was something compared to a lot of these other guys who really haven't played at all. That is something I think notable. I don't think he's a starter, but I think if you're looking for like a 4 or a 5, like a guy on the depth chart to possibly come in and play outside of Peyton O'Leary and maybe a Maureen Walker, I think Charleston's up there as well as one of those guys you can definitely get some playing time, at least in garbage time, which we'll see how much garbage time there actually is this year with the expanded Big Ten. But for right now, I think there is a possible position for him as a backup to one of the wide receivers.
There's 2 true freshmen, low 4-star Marion Stewart, and not to be confused with a Morian, high 3-star Channing Goodwin. I don't think they early enrolled. I think they're fall enrollees. Stewart, I think, is a slot guy, but Goodwin's like 6'1". I think he could play on the outside. Do you think they'll burn their red shirts? What do you think?
I think they're going to keep their red shirt. Okay. It's possible there's more competition than what meets the eye for the media right now, but we really haven't heard much about them, which could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. Really don't know. But for right now, I think both guys were very productive in high school. Both guys can come here and compete. But I think from what we've seen, last year was kind of an anomaly with Michigan letting freshmen play as much as they did with Fred Moore and Samaj Morgan, Carmelo English. But I think with next season, they might just kind of stick with the guys they have been able to develop, and these guys will be kept in secret.
Okay, offensive line. All right, let me see if I can get this recitation correct. At the very beginning of the year, they start out with Carson Barnhart is on the left side of the line at left tackle. Trevor Keegan is at left guard, where he plays the entire year. Drake Nugent is at center, where he plays the entire year. He had transferred in from Stanford. Zach Zinter is at right guard, where he played until he got hurt. And Miles Hinton, who had also transferred in from Stanford, was starting the year at right tackle. For any further, I got that right?
Correct.
Okay, so then it's like 3 weeks into the year. They played Bowling Green. J.D. McCarthy throwing a bunch of picks. They were sort of letting pressure through. In my interpretation, just like I've been watching I thought that Drake Nugent was a really good center at Stanford. I'm not a big fan of offensive line transfers, but I was like, Nugent, you're okay. Hinton, on the other hand, I have no idea why Michigan took this guy. I have no idea why Michigan's been taking so many offensive line transfers, period. They sort of broke the seal the year before with a Virginia guy, Olusegun Olufemi, and then they kept going. Like, they went hard at the transfer portal. Anyway, I sort of got taking Nugent, but I really thought taking Hinton was a mistake because he sucked out loud at Stanford, and he's continued to suck at Michigan. So they benched him. 3 drives into the Rutgers game in week 4, they benched him. And their solution to that was they moved Barnhart from left to right to replace Hinton. They pulled Ladarius Henderson off the bench. He was the left tackle from Arizona State, another Pac-12 transfer, although I always liked Henderson. He had a kind of weird career. He was by far their best player, but then he got hurt. And so like kind of had a checkered 2022, but then Arizona State fans were real happy that he was going to come back in 2023. But then Michigan pulled the rug out from under them and stole him. Way to go, guys. Anyway, so then Henderson winds up playing for basically the rest of the season, except for the Maryland game, which was weird. Anyway, and then it gets real weird. Zinter gets injured against Ohio State. So the way they solve that is they move Barnhart inboard and have him switch from right tackle to right guard to fill in for Zinter. And they take not Miles Hinton off the bench, but rather they have Trente Jones, who has been their 6th man all year. He's been the guy when they go to their jumbo sets, like their big I formation goal line package or whatever. He's been their 6th man. They take him in and have him play right tackle for all their postseason games. And, he finishes out the season. That's their configuration to finish the season. Jake, did I get all that right? I know I sprinkled in some opinions. You don't have to endorse the opinions, but the factual matters, did I get the factual matters all right?
Correct.
Okay. The reason that I was sprinkling in those opinions about Hinton and also the trying to track assiduously about when he did and did not play is that all those guys are gone. Henderson was drafted in the 7th round by the Texans. Keegan was drafted in the 5th round by the Eagles. Zinter was drafted in the 3rd round by the Browns. Nugent signed to UDFA with the 49ers. Barnhart signed to UDFA with the Chargers. Jones, the 6th man who played 3 games, signed to UDFA with the Packers. And the only guy who comes back, who played last year, was Miles Hinton. And I took pains to note that he played like 3 games plus the Maryland game because Henderson was sitting it out, which I didn't understand. And I don't think is any good. And I still don't think he's any good. Okay. Now, Jake, you can unload if you want.
Yeah. I mean, the basic idea of this offensive line configuration from last year to this year is fascinating. The fact that they won a national championship with, as you just said, all those different configurations in the offensive line, and how a lot of them weren't homegrown talent and some didn't play a lot and they just kind of got thrusted into a starting role. And now you have guys who are kind of all over the place with, their experience playing at Michigan, but also at the collegiate level. And I think with Miles Hinton, I understand, the negative comments towards him from last season. I think recruiting him, partially was about for last season. We want someone. Then they also found Ladarius Henderson, but also I think he was a Michigan legacy. His brother Chris went to Michigan, was very successful here. He was looking to transfer. Chris Hinton did very well in the NFL as well, playing in the NFL. So he comes in. He has this Michigan background, and yes, they tried him at left tackle, but I also think from these previous years, Michigan didn't play anybody real for the first few games, the last 3 years at least. And I think they really just treated all those games as like preseason games. They wanted to see what they had. I think they liked Hinton in terms of the scheme more to start those 3 games. But as you said, right, with Bowling Green, JJ kind of got put under fire a little bit, and they had to make a decision. Ladarius Henderson, who I thought should have started from the first game.
Oh, Jake, are you suggesting that their plan all along was for Henderson to be the real starter, and they were just sort of like letting Hinton play to see something because they knew they had weak opponents?
Not necessarily. I think they wanted to see what Hinton was made of, and they knew that they had time, and they knew they could develop him, and that he played a lot. He played, Darius Henderson played. I don't exactly know why they started Hinton over Henderson to begin with, but I think the context of those 3 games were kind of like, startup games, was why they pulled that parachute then after Bowling Green, because they realized, okay, now we're getting into it, the real games. We've now had 3 weeks of real practice. We had the whole offseason. We had the fall camp. Now we know who the best player is for our team. I think with Darius Henderson, they were like, that's the guy we're going to go with. And then they just kind of had Hinton sit on the bench for whatever reason for the rest of the season. But that was last season. And I think that's just kind of what I've been able to find. I've been very skeptical of this offensive line for a long time, just kind of deciding what they were going to do with Miles Hinton, with Greg Crippen, with these other guys. I think from talking with Hinton himself and the other players and the coaching staff, Hinton really took that to heart. And I think he kind of needed that wake-up call, because he said he wasn't always very serious about football really up until maybe sophomore year of high school. And then he was just like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I think last season was another really big wake-up call for him, where he was like, this is actually what I want to do. I don't want to get benched again. So he's put a lot of work in this offseason. He's become more of a leader as well, which I think is important on the offensive line, especially at the left tackle position. And I think for next season, I have no qualms with Miles Hinton starting at left tackle right now. I think he has played at Michigan now long enough. He's been under this coaching staff. He worked with Sharon Moore as the offensive line coach. Now Sharon's the head coach, and also with Grant Newsome too. And I think they really do see something in him, and I'm excited to see what they do. They even listed him as like one of their look to breakout candidates, because they're really excited about what Miles Hinton can bring.
Boy, I'd be concerned. Now, I'm not sure how much I can make inferences from the spring game. Literally the first left tackle that I was seeing was the true freshman, Blake Frazier. I think they were kind of mixing things up. So yes, the fact that I didn't see Hinton until a little later, I'm not really making an inference about that. I think they were sort of like kind of playing around with stuff a little bit. But let's stick with the tackles before we get to the centers, and then do guards last. I think that you're probably right that they will go with Hinton as one of the tackle starters, kind of because why wouldn't they? He's definitely the most experienced one that they have. I kind of don't think that they're going to go with the true freshman Frazier. He was highly recruited, but he's a true freshman. This doesn't strike me as that type of program. I'll pause for a second. Do you want to push back on either of those?
No, I agree. They will most likely not go with Frazier to start the season.
If I had to bet, okay, let me list guys who I think are tackles next, and you tell me if you think I should move any of these guys to different positions. The guys who I think are tackles are Andrew Gentry, Tristan Bounds, Evan Link, Connor Jones, and the true freshmen who haven't enrolled yet, but this is where I think they're going to go, Andrew Sprague, Luke Hamilton, Ben Roebuck.
I agree with all those. I would add Jeff Percy to that group as well.
Oh, really? I saw him playing guard in the spring game.
Yeah,
I know he's played tackle in garbage time in the past, but you think he's more likely to play tackle than guard?
I think he's that swing kind of all the way on the offensive line. I mean, he's 6'8", 320. He played guard at the spring game, but since he did play tackle in the past, I wouldn't put it past this team to work him in at both.
Well, that's interesting about Percy, because my guess for the other starting tackle was going to be Andrew Gentry, because I had seen him playing tackle in the past, and I basically have never seen any of these guys even get their feet. Like, I haven't seen Tristan Bounds or Connor Jones, play before, and those guys have been on the team for a couple of years, like not even like see the field in garbage time. Evan Link will be a redshirt freshman, and I think this team would probably prefer a more experienced guy, and the rest of the guys are true freshmen. So that, that's why I just defaulted to Andrew Gentry. What do you think, Jake?
I agree. I think even without defaulting, I think Andrew Gentry right now has like this, I don't even know, I would say leg up. I think realistically speaking, from my experience working with this team, I would think it's Andrew Gentry. So I would agree with that. Tristan Bounds, I think, is definitely, he is a right tackle, does not play left tackle. He's not going to start, but he's been with his team now for 3 seasons, and he's been working very hard. And we could see him, making a push, not to start, but at least getting maybe some playing time in garbage time. But I think it'd probably go Gentry 1, and then Tristan Bounds and Jeff Percy like 2A, 2B right now, if you wanted to actually have like a legitimate depth chart. But for right now, I would say Gentry would be the starting right tackle.
Okay. Center. I've been hearing for a long time, it's Greg Crippen. It's Greg Crippen. We love Greg Crippen. And then they've recruited 2 transfer guys over him in successive years. Is it Greg Crippen?
It's Greg Crippen. Yeah, I know. This is tough. I wrote an article about this about a month ago, and he's not had the greatest, luck, I think, on this team. Michigan itself has had great luck with transfer centers. I think the fact that they didn't recruit another transfer center this season means, in my mind, that Greg Crippen is a starting center. I think he would say he's a starting center. And I believe a few of the other, I think Miles Hinton said he believes Greg Crippen right now has been getting most of the reps at the starting center position. So I think it's finally his time. I don't know why they didn't believe in him in the past. It's worked out for them. But right now, it should be Greg Crippen's job to lose.
I could guess. Behind him, I would think Raheem Anderson. I think there's 2 other dudes who could snap the ball, and those are Raheem Anderson and Dominique Guidis. And I think simply because he was higher rated out of high school, it'll be Anderson. Although I haven't seen either one of those 2 guys like at all. And that's the entire basis of my guess. Guidis was like a low 3-star. Anderson was a low 4-star. That's it.
Yeah, I would say right now Anderson and then probably Giudice, but you're right. This at the center position, there hasn't been a lot of playing time and snaps amongst them in real game situations outside of Greg Crippen. So that's the tough thing that they're going to have to figure out is with this depth chart, where's the leash and are you confident enough in a guy like Greg Crippen? But even after Greg Crippen, as you said, with Anderson and Giudice, where is the line and how much have they been working the offseason to try to be a starting caliber player?
So guards, this is the situation is a little confused by 2 factors. One is that Amir Herring played guard in the spring game, but then transferred out after the spring game. And then Giovanni El Hadi, who I think A, was the highest rated dude in the room, and B, was the guy, like I saw, he didn't play, I think, in 2023, but I saw him getting several starts in 2022 when I charted that season. So I think the staff probably likes that guy, but I think he was injured and unavailable in the spring game. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it appears right now.
So I would actually pencil him in pretty high. It's just I didn't get to see him in the spring game, so I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, right now he's going to start at one of the guard positions.
Okay.
He can play both sides, and same with some of the other guards. So I keep going back and forth in my mind which side he's going to go on. Right now to assume right guard, but he also played a lot of left, so it's tough to decide which side he's actually going to play.
If it were me, I would go with Percy here, and because the other guys are. Well, I might have gone with Herring, but he transferred out. The other guys are Phoebe, who's a redshirt freshman, Guarnera, who's a true freshman, and then the transfer in, Josh Preby from Northwestern. I didn't get to see him in the spring game. I think he had enrolled by then, but I think they were just holding him out because of an injury. But I wouldn't go with him, A, because he's a transfer, and B, because I watched Northwestern's film, and that wouldn't be a good idea. I don't know why they took him. I don't know why they're addicted to transfers. Like, do your job, Sharon Moore, or whoever's the offensive line coach now.
It's been working for him. It's been working.
It's like drawing to an inside straight, man. I had a roommate in college who we would play a weekly poker game, and my roommate, like the first time we had our weekly poker night, successfully drew to an inside straight, and it ruined this person for every subsequent game of poker that we ever had, because was just convinced that this was a smart thing to do. And it was like, man, I worry about this for Michigan, like winning a national championship with 3 transfers on the offensive line. Now they're just convinced that, oh, this is something that works, when like 7 years of portal data indicates that it doesn't. Anyway, don't play Preby. Trust me on that. You go with Heidi and Percy. Anyway, do you think that's how it's going to go, or do you think they're going to stick in Preby?
I completely disagree. Prebe's the one who's going to start at left guard.
Oh boy,
I think they're going to start him. Yes, like the film in general of Northwestern, yeah, you can take it for what it may. But if you look at all the other guys that they brought in, I agree. I think they have this mentality of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, it's been working for them, and they've been able to pull guys from not great programs and made them into very solid offensive linemen. And so I think Prebe, as I said, Prebe started at left guard, but also El-Hadi has played left guard too. So that's the tough part about which side they're going to play. But for all the new guys coming in at all the different positions, I think I'm the most confident in the offensive line that it's going to be Hinton, Prebe, Crippen, El-Hadi, and Gentry on week 1. And if it changes, then it changes. But I think right now on June 25th, I would say that that's going to be offensive line.
Was that your order, left to right?
That was from left to right.
Yeah, I buy it. I mean, that's what it'll be. I don't think it's a good idea. I think there's 2 guys on that line I wouldn't play, but okay. Well, the job here is predictions. What do you think about this line compared to last year's line?
It's definitely, it's tough, because last year's line, you were anchored by your guards. I mean, you had Zinter, who was, before he got hurt, and even after he got hurt, he was still so highly regarded. But you had these fantastic guys in the offensive line. It worked for your center, Nugent, and it worked Olu the year before. Ladarius Henderson, it worked out for them. Carson Barnhart was the Swiss Army knife on the offensive line. He wasn't great at times, especially at left tackle, that they really couldn't play him at left tackle, and he got beat sometimes at right tackle. But once they were able to move him inside, I think he was actually really able to find his spot. And you got really lucky with Trente Jones too, coming in once Zinter went down against Ohio State. I mean, I know being in the crowd and when Zinter went down, you had this big gasp of, oh my gosh, this offensive line is not going to be the same. They're going to give up all these sacks. They're not going to run the ball the same. And it really didn't change much for what they wanted to do. And especially against Washington, the national championship game, it worked to perfection. So from last year to this year, yes, this team on paper doesn't look great. From what I've been able to do a lot of research, there still is a lot of experience with this offensive line. Miles Hinton's played a lot of football. Pre's played a lot of football and started a lot of games. Crippen's been with this program for so long. He's been able to sit behind a lot of guys. He would even tell us in the press conferences like a month ago that, as much as it sucked to have to be the backup, he still was able to learn from these guys. And the fact that Olu and Drake Nugent are now in the NFL is definitely very helpful for him, and the experience he learned from them. El-Hadi's been with this program. Gentry's been with this program. So, yes, they like to bring in transfers, but they've also been developing guys for a long time. And I think now, finally, they're like, okay, we had to fulfill a guard spot, but everybody else is homegrown, at least for over a year being at Michigan. I mean, I count Miles Hinton now as like a Michigan guy. So because of that, I really think they should be just fine. Now, this could all change against Texas week 2, and we're going to be like, oh, wow, okay, we are not ready for this. But from right now, from what the team has been saying, the fact that our head coach was an offensive lineman and is an offensive line guru and aficionado, and same with Grant Newsome now being also an offensive lineman, coming in now actually being able to coach the offensive line, I really feel like they're in great hands with the coaching staff, and I'm really not that worried. Especially, and you have to give them some flack because they just won the national championship. So you really, I don't think it's right to question their talent until I see them week 1 because it worked last season.
Switch over and talk about the defense. The first thing I want to ask you about is the structure of the defense. What I was seeing last year out of Minter, and the year before as well, was it's structured like a 4-3, but they were pretty exclusively playing out of a nickel, with Sainris still the nickel playing in sort of a, the classic star safety, or what is now a classic star safety role, replicating a third linebacker. They would, against some heavy configurations from the offense, go to a 3 down tackles, 2 stand-up ends configuration, but so in other words, like a 5-2, 5-2-4. Although interestingly, a lot of times they'd leave Sainris still on and they'd pull a cornerback in order to make that happen. But it was 5 defensive linemen across the line for heavy looks. But even then, it was far from a strict defensive rule that they would do that on. They only did on about, actually I have the number, on about 36% of heavy personnel snaps. They actually, one of the things that I really appreciated about Michigan's defense is they really, rather than just like strictly matching offensive personnel for their defensive substitution rules, they actually really tried to crack whether the offense was going to run or pass, although some people, I'm guessing, are jumping in right now with some suggestions about how could they have cracked that. And we're putting in, they would only go to their 5 defensive linemen look when they were pretty certain it was going to be a run, and stayed in their nickel 4 down configuration, even against heavy personnel, the other, 60 something percent of the time, even against heavy configurations when they were more certain it was going to be a pass, be it on down and distance, or whether they have the tight end in who's that's really more like the passing tight end, etc. So I wanted to register that, or actually, let me ask you first. Were you observing the same thing, Jake?
I was. Yeah, I think they showed a lot of different looks, and I think you're completely right about how I was able to be successful in that respect. So I completely agree with your analysis of what you've seen.
The reason that I'm asking you about that is that in the spring game with new defensive coordinator Martindale, I was exclusively seeing the 5 down configure, the 3 defensive tackles, 2 stand-up defensive ends configuration. And I know from watching his games, with the Giants, which I maintain a passing interest in because there's a couple Ducks players on it, that dude plays a 3-4 defense. Now it's not a 5 down, those are classified as OLBs, but still it's a 5 man on the line of scrimmage look. And I'm like, is this guy changing the defense? Especially because unlike last year, in which when they would put in that third guy and go to an odd front with a nose, it was all DTs. The 3 dudes who were fist down, it would be like Graham Grant and Jenkins, or Graham Good and Benny, something like that. Whereas when I was watching him in the spring game, it'd be like Grant, Brandt, and then you take another end, like one of the bigger ends, like Etta, and they'd have that guy put his fist down and then put a couple of stand-up ends to either side of him. And I'm like, this really, and they were doing that every snap. Now I know the offense was often in 12 personnel snaps, but sets, but like that's why I was talking about in 2023, they didn't have strict substitution rules. Like this really looked like in the spring game they were going to a 3-4 defensive structure. So that's my question for you, Jake. Like, are they going to a 3-4 defensive structure?
I saw that too in the spring game. I can't obviously say 100% from what it looked like. It's possible. I think he's recognizing the personnel that he has as well, and seeing you have Grant and Graham, you want to play, and then you have these strong, you got these edges that have also been really, really great. I think from what we've seen in the past, what we saw in the spring game, I wouldn't exactly take for like 100% for what we're going to see in the fall. I think these last two defensive coordinators with Mike Macdonald, Jesse Minter, still come from Wink's system. And I know Wink's going to want to put his own sprinkle on it, but I really honestly see them doing a lot of different looks and changing a lot of different things up. But I think the 3-4 structure from what this personnel has right now might be the most consistent.
So that's pretty interesting. Do you think it's appropriate to continue talking about this in a, just split up tackles and ends, or do we need to invent a couple other configuration, like position assignments? Like, is there a separate nose tackle for this team? Is there a difference between a stand-up end and a fist down end?
I think you probably talk about them separately. We can still talk about them separately. I think I've seen like Kenneth Grant, for example, as like the primary nose tackle.
Yeah.
And Mason Graham as the primary DT.
Yeah.
And then you have Rayshon Benny in there, Trey Pierce, Cam Brandt, right, as you were saying. All of them are capable of kind of playing a lot of different positions. I think Kenneth Grant's probably the most capable of playing at nose tackle specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to the edges, right, you have your own completely different group of people. So I don't see so much overlap aside from, Etta, who can play, I think, both at DT and edge. You just have all these different guys who've really been proven, some guys can play inside and have been really, really good inside. And you got these other guys at edge. So I'd probably still keep them separate in terms of discussing them.
Well, let's start with the big guys. So 3 big guys leave. They were basic. Well, it was a big rotation among guys that I would characterize as defensive tackles last year. I think I would characterize it as a 5-man main rotation, unless you want to push back on that. Those 5 guys being Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Rayshon Benny, Chris Jenkins, and Cam Good.
Yeah, that was pretty much what it was last. Yes, correct. 2
of those guys leave. Chris Jenkins was drafted in the 2nd round by the Bengals, and Cam Good just graduated and is done. I was a little surprised he didn't sign like a UDFA contract. Like thought he was pretty good. No pun intended. They lose one other guy who I would see like in garbage time as Reese Attenberry. He transferred out. I think that's for the departures. I know there's 2 other guys who left the end room, but they were pretty clearly ends. So I'll talk about them later. Anybody else that I missed?
No, that sounds right.
The guys who are coming back again from the primary rotation, Graham, Grant, and Benny. Although Benny, I didn't see in the spring game. I think he was just being held out with a ding or something. 2 other guys I saw just a little bit of last year because I think they were still redshirting. These are 2023 guys. They were both like high 3-star, like almost 4-star guys in the composite. Those were Cameron Brandt and Trey Pierce. And that was it for guys that I saw. I didn't see, and I'm curious about what their status is. Because I literally didn't see him in the spring game, Alessandro Lorenzetto and Brooks Barr. What's the story with those 2? Do you know?
Yeah, I actually really don't know. They're definitely depth pieces, but very much further down the depth chart. And I think you're probably not going to see them in actual game situations. They're really just going to stick with, as you said, probably that 5-man rotation and just kind of roll with it.
The last guy, and I'm a little curious about in part of this discussion about nose versus like DT, is Ike Iwanua, who I haven't really seen before. Like he was a 2021 guy, a mid 3-star. He's like a 0.85 in the composite. Didn't really see that guy, but he's real big. He's like 313 pounds. But in the spring game with the ones, I was seeing him play that nose position. He was pretty much the only guy other than Kenneth Grant I was seeing play that nose position. And if I'm on to something here about Martindale kind of switching up the defensive structure, hey, maybe we see a lot more of that guy. You know what I mean?
No, I do, and I've already myself had him listed as a backup nose tackle. Given his size, given, as you said, what they did with him in the spring game, and kind of his specific skill set, you're right. He really hasn't seen any game action at all. Last season, he was named the Scout Team Defensive Player of the Week against Eastern Carolina University. It was like really the only thing that he was really kind of awarded for. But I think you're right that they have all these really skilled guys in the defensive tackle position, but in terms of nose tackle specifically, you can't play Kenneth Grant every snap, so you're still going to need some rotation. I think Ike is the next guy up, who they've been really trying to mold into the backup nose tackle.
What about Trey Pierce? I think he was also like Benny, being held out of the spring game with a minor injury. I think like he's 300. Like I think. What do you think? Is that guy potentially a nose or not? Where do you think he fits?
Yeah, so I thought he'd be like they would mold him into a nose tackle. I've really been seeing him at the DT position, specifically behind Mason Graham. So
okay,
from what I've seen, probably not the nose tackle, but it obviously could change. But they haven't really worked him in much, the nose tackle.
And then how about Brant? I did see in the spring game. He was playing basically Mason Graham's role, but for the other team, the yellow team, not the blue team. So I figured he'll just continue doing that. He's like I was going to say the slimmest guy, but it's a weird thing to say about a guy. Anyway, I figure he continues that role. What I don't know is what about Rayshon Benny? What do you think? Does he continue playing the same role that he did last year? Do you think if this is a new defense, do you think he has a new role?
I think they liked what they got from him last year. You lost Chris Jenkins, which is a big loss, and you still have Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, but you're really looking for the next guy up, I think, because they do like playing with the 3 DTs at times, or at least having rotation. They said they like having rally groups, which is to try to preserve energy. They really are trying to get guys in and out. So expect, I guess, Kenneth Grant and Mason Grant to play together. But then when you want kind of that next group up, or even a guy like Rayshon Benny to come in and more downs, I definitely can see like a Cam Brant and Rayshon Benny being the next two, or Trey Wright or Ike and Rayshon Benny being there. So I definitely see him increasing his snaps even from last season, because there is kind of a vacancy right there in the defensive tackle room. And they just want to keep seeing him improve, but he really has a lot of flexibility on the defensive line, which they like about him. And I definitely see him just continuing to improve in what he's been doing for this team.
There are 4 true freshmen. Well, okay, they recruited 8 true freshmen in the defensive line group, of whom I think only one was an early enrollee, and so I could see him in the spring game. That was Dominic Nichols, who was playing off the edge, but I mean, just look at his body type. He's obviously an edge. I didn't need any help with that one. The other guys, I'm going to ask for your help categorizing them. I think 4 of them are going to be defensive tackles. I think those 4 are Ted Hammond, Owen Waffle, David Palepale, and Manuel Bagel.
Yep, that's right. I would list them all as DTs as well.
Okay. And then before I get there, I'll just list them. The other 3, Lugard Egopaki, and Mason Curtis, and Devin Baxter, I have as ends.
Correct.
So before I go to the ends room, though, the 2 guys that I was seeing who, like, I believe are ends, and if I hadn't watched the spring game, I would just happily continue thinking of this as 4-2-5 defense and would consider these guys as ends. But then I saw them in the spring game playing fist down inside the stand-up ends, and so I'm like, are these guys getting moved inside? And so I want to ask you about, before we leave off the defensive tackle discussion, those 2 guys for the yellow and the blue team respectively were Eno Etta and Merrick Kumba. What are their roles in the 2024 defense, do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I think Eno Etta can play both edge and defensive tackle. He really has a cool skill set where he can play really anywhere on the defensive line for that. And I know they really liked him playing in different places. And I think for him, seeing the field, I think his versatility is going to be really big for him, again, as part of that kind of rotation. So I think you're right in seeing he definitely can play his fist down inside, but he also can definitely stand up on the outside and play edge. And then I think for Kumba, I've really listed him as an edge. That's probably where I see him the most.
I mean, he's much
now.
lighter. He's like 50 pounds lighter.
Exactly. So I don't necessarily know if they would play him inside. I think they were trying something with him and just seeing what he can do against this Michigan offensive line. But I think when it gets to the season, you're probably primarily going to see him at the edge spot.
Okay, and then, so then, having said that, I also saw a couple of walk-ons. I think this room in that same, hey, they were fist down guys, but I don't really think we're going to see them during the year, so I'm not going to bother talking about them. Everybody else that I was seeing were, fist up dudes, and playing fist up was pretty common last year. So I don't really know how much that's worth sweating. I'm just going to go through the rest of the room for the end group. They were playing, I would characterize it as a 4-man primary rotation, and then there was one extra guy who would sort of swing in sometimes. The 4 guys that I was seeing in the primary rotation were Josiah Stewart, who was wearing number 5 but has switched to number 0. I hate it when guys change numbers. Derek Moore, Jalen Harrell, and Braden McGregor. And then the 5th guy that I would sometimes see swing in was TJ Guy. Have I got all that right?
That is very correct.
Stewart, Moore, and Guy return. Harrell was drafted in the 7th round by the Titans. McGregor signed a UDFA with the Jets. I believe that Harrell and McGregor are the only guys who left. Nobody transferred out. They also return, in addition to Stewart, Moore, and Guy, they also return Keyshawn Bennett, who I think played some garbage time. I didn't really see him. They bring back Eno Etta, who we've been talking about a lot, but just for being such a surprising, interesting player in the spring game. He was a mid 4-star in the 2023 class, and I think played 1 snap last year. It was just such a surprising dude in the spring game, is why I've been talking about him so much. Kumba was another 2023 guy in that same role, but again, didn't see him last year. He was a mid 3-star. There was another 2023 mid 3-star that I didn't see last year, Breon Ishmael. And then the last scholarship guy in the room who's a returner is Tyler McLaurin. He was a high 3-star in the 2021 class. I don't think I've seen him in 4 years. I'm not even sure I saw him in the spring game. Is the ship sailed on that guy, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I haven't. I've always been looking out for McLaurin too. You're right. I didn't really see him much in the spring game, which surprised me as well. I think guys just keep jumping him, and he just keeps kind of falling in the depth chart. Unfortunately for him, he's still definitely part of this team, and he's going to practice and stuff, but outside, in terms of games specifically, I think you're right. Unless he completely comes out of nowhere during the season, I would have to assume that probably he's just there as a depth piece, but that's really going to be his role on this team going forward.
Obviously, they're pretty happy with Stewart and Moore. I think they're probably pretty happy with Guy because of the amount of playing time he was getting. I figure he gets a step up. They probably want 1 or 2 more. No pun intended with Derek Moore's name. What do you think? Bennett, Etta, and they call it a day?
I think so. Yeah, they're really excited about TJ Guy this year. During the pro day, a lot of the guys like McGregor and Chris Jenkins were saying his name, and Cam Brantz for the defensive tackle position. But TJ Guy, this team, as we even saw last season, they're going to run with a lot of guys, right? They ran with really 4 edges that were playing a lot of snaps last season.
And that's pretty standard. The somewhat unusual thing at all is that they had a 5th guy.
Yep, exactly. So I think because of that, yes, you have Moore and Stewart who will, be the strong side, weak side starters, but then that rotation of Eno Etta, TJ Guy, Keyshawn Bennett, even Breon Ishmael, or even Americ Kumba, who maybe plays, maybe doesn't. I think between all of those guys, you're really going to have – you probably actually will have, again, 5 guys that will probably be in a rotation next season.
Yeah, I was just discriminating between the 3 2023 guys. I wasn't really inferring anything from the fact that they were all redshirting. It's just that Etta was a mid 4-star and Kumba and Ismail were mid 3-stars. And I was like, And then I think that the true freshman will there's some talented guys in that room. Like Ed Akpayi was, mid 3 or 4-star. There's some talented guys there. I just tend to think this is the kind of program that redshirts them,
Definitely in the defensive line, it's a lot about growing them little by little. Some guys might play sometimes, but definitely in terms of that redshirt year, they've really been able to utilize a lot of years out of the defensive linemen.
Well, I think they're skinny too. They're just sort of coming a little underweight right now. So yeah. Okay, linebacker. They The primary starters were Junior Colson and Michael Barrett. Both of those guys were drafted. Third round Chargers for Colson, seventh round Panthers for Barrett. They would rotate in Ernest Hausman from Nebraska. The great Michigan tradition continues of stealing other Big Ten teams' best linebacker. They got Ed Werner's kid from Michigan State earlier. They got Hausman from Nebraska. This year, they got Jason Barham from Maryland. I approve. You make your opponent weaker. You make you stronger. It's great. Anyone can be a Michigan man if you try hard enough, if you're a good enough linebacker. They had a bunch of guys leave, though. This was interesting. Samaj Bridgman, but who didn't play, that they played in the spring game and then left. Samaj Bridgman transferred out. He was a 2023 4-star. Hayden Moore was a 2023 mid 3-star, transferred out after the spring game. Joey Velazquez, who'd been on the team forever, transferred out. Jeremiah Beasley, who was a 2024 recruit as a 4-star, signed, played in the spring game, and then transferred out after the spring game.
Yeah.
I think those 6 departures, if Beasley counts as a departure, that's it.
Yep. Okay. And you're right. There's a lot of turnover in that room.
So Hausman returns. He was the, like I said, the third guy in. I saw a little bit. That sheet says he was in a lot. I didn't actually see him that much. I think this was mostly garbage time. Jaden Hood, the low 4-star from 2021. There was another guy who I actually think was probably higher in the rotation, but he missed the first half of the year. That was Jimmy Reuter. He was a low 4-star from the 2022 class. And then I don't know, he's probably being a little ginger with him when he came back in the second half of the 2023 season. The other interesting thing was that there was a walk-on, Christian Boyven, who I think was awarded a scholarship, or I'm not sure.
Yep.
Then a couple other guys, Micah Pollard. Last guy was Jason Hewlett, who was a 2023 high 3-star who, I didn't see him until real late in the spring game. He was the guy that was watching in the spring game until the latest to finally see that guy. They brought in, as I said, Jason Barham from Maryland. They got a couple of true freshmen, Cole Sullivan, who enrolled early. That was another guy that I had to wait till late to see. And then Zach Ludwig enrolls in the fall. So there's a lot of bodies in this room, but I sort of think they're going to do the same thing as last year. They're going to play Barham. They're going to play Hausman. I actually think Reuter is going to be a little higher up. I think they like him, and he missed the season. And then I think the rest of these guys are going to sit on the bench and then transfer out in 2025. What do you think about that assessment, Jake?
I think this is the easiest position group to it's pretty self-explanatory, right? With Barham, Hausman, it's Jimmy Rolder.
Oh, have I been saying Reuter and it's Rolder?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's Jimmy Rolder. And so Rolder definitely will be the next guy up, and then Jaden Hood is probably there too. And outside of those guys, Boyven is a special teams guy. I see him playing a lot, but really those 4 guys are the main 4. But with Barham and Hausman and Rolder, you're probably going to see exactly what you saw last year with that 3-man rotation, but mainly those first 2 getting primarily the snaps.
Do you know what was there? I missed the story. Do you know what was going on with Rolder?
I don't exactly know what the injury was, but there definitely was an injury. They didn't disclose exactly what the injury I think specifically was, but all we know is that he just appeared in 6 games and he got hurt. So that was just from what at least the coaching staff was telling us.
He appeared so early in the spring game and he was hitting hard. I was just like, there's no way that Michigan saw this guy in practices last year and was like, oh, we didn't know what we had until the second half of the year when it dawned on us. It had to be, this guy just wasn't available. And then when he was available, it was like, let's slow play this guy because he's still coming back. That's what clued me into I bet this guy's actually higher up in the rotation in 2024.
I agree.
From watching them in 2023, what was your assessment of Hausman's level of play versus Colson and Barrett's level of play?
Yeah, I think Hausman was still pretty raw last season. I think his ability to read an offense and different schemes, especially against the better teams, and this team didn't play a ton of amazing teams last season, which I think helped him in terms of his growth, but he came in very green from Nebraska. And I think, from what you saw with Mike Barrett, who had been in Michigan for forever and saw a ton of stuff with him, and even with Colson, they were just ahead in terms of being able to read a play. Hausman's great at once he sees the ball, he can really attack, and he's a hard-hitting linebacker. He definitely has improved his IQ over time, but I think the ability as a linebacker to read the offense, call out the plays for the defense, being able to kind of be that guy as one of the leaders in the middle of that defense, I think he just needed a full season under his belt at Michigan, kind of being that third guy behind two guys who then went to the NFL. And I think now, especially what you saw with him in the championship game and even into the playoffs going into this season, I'm really excited to see what Hausman can do, because he just keeps improving every single week.
Yeah, I had a similar diagnosis in 2023, play diagnosis. I was just like, this guy's a step behind.
A little bit, yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's talk about outside corners. So I was seeing actually a bunch of different guys. Seemed like they were rotating actually quite a bit here. I was seeing Josh Wallace. I was seeing Will Johnson. I was also seeing DJ Waller, Keyshawn Harris. I saw a bit of Jair Hill, although I think maybe they're trying to conserve his red shirt because he was a true freshman last year. But he still pulled down a bunch of tackles in the few games that he played. I was seeing Jaden McBurrows, who's been on the team for a while, and I was seeing Miles Pollard, a guy who we don't know if he's related.
They're not related.
Just a crazy coincidence. Yeah, I was seeing like 7 different dudes, right?
Yep, pretty much.
Keyshawn Harris is a former walk-on, is that correct?
Yes.
But he has a scholarship now, right?
Yes, now he does.
Wallace was signed to UDFA with the Rams. Waller transferred out after the spring game, which I think was a bit of a surprise, or at least it came as a surprise to me. I think he was in line for a bunch of praying time.
No, that was I of all the guys that transferred out, that completely took me by surprise. I mean, something must have been said in a meeting telling him that he wasn't going to play as much as he thought he was, but I thought he was perfectly in line to be the second corner on the outside, and the fact that he left really not just kind of confused me, but a lot of the people that I work with, just wondering what could have been done, what could have been said to have him depart as early as he did.
So Will Johnson comes back. I figure he's got a job locked down.
Yes.
Like you, I had the same interpretation of Waller leaving, that's about, I can think of 3 different interpretations. 1, they really, really like Harris. 2, they really, really like Hill, and they just didn't want to burn his red shirt, but hey, his talent's off the chart, but he's blown the rest of you guys out the water. Or 3, they're going to a 3-4 defense. They don't need as many corners on the field.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination between 2 and 3. I think they like Hill more than Harris. Mm-hmm. Hill, as you said, showed some great highlights in limited playing time he had, and they want to preserve his red shirt. And from what we've been hearing, he's right now in line to be the second corner on the outside to start, especially since Waller has left. Keyshawn Harris is definitely going to get his playing time. He's definitely going to play at times, but I think between liking Hill and, as you said, you might just not need as many corners. You got a lot of guys in this room, a lot of guys in the secondary that are very talented. They keep recruiting some really cool guys on the outside. You even, bring in some other guys too. You even bring back someone as well. And because of all that, I think DJ Waller said, I'm not going to play here. I got to find somewhere else to go.
I was during the spring game during last year, during the very few reps when Sainer still went off the field, the guy that I was seeing play nickel behind him was McBurrows. Do you think he's losing out on playing time? What do you think is going on with McBurrows?
I think McBurrows is right now in line to be the nickel starter.
Okay.
I think he is actually, if anything, going to gain more playing time. I think, yes, you're right. He was sitting behind Sainer still, and Sainer still, again, they just kind of found a gem on the offense, and they were able to push him on defense, and he was a standout, and he got drafted, I think, in a great spot for what he plays. And I think McBurrows has been waiting for his time, and I think his body type and his skill set mirrors a nickel corner, and I think right now he's in line to start a nickel, but there also could be rotation there too.
Yeah, Sainrisville is interesting because, you got drafted in the second round by the Commanders. It's as you say, he started on the offense. He was originally a wide receiver, and he came pretty late in his career to being a defensive player. He actually does not grade out particularly well in coverage, in man coverage for me, but he's so tough, and he hits so hard. And I sort of, I don't know, has an intuitive sense for the game that was quite valuable, and they just basically never took him off the field.
Exactly.
and in many ways sort of like built the defensive structure around having him on the field so much, which is why it was so weird. Is like if I blinded myself to the, who these guys were and just looked at their grades, I was like, boy, there's kind of a black hole in coverage in the middle of the field here. Oh, it's number 0. How strange that this guy who they built the defenses around, like if they actually put this guy in man coverage on a guy who's running the slot fade or something, like about half the time he gets burned, but like they were willing to deal with that, especially in the Big Ten where who cares? How often can anybody really take advantage of that? So you think that McBurrows is in line to be that guy? Do you think he has that skill set?
I do. I think he's right now in line. I think he's, again, played sparingly, but he's played at times, and he's played at the nickel when they took up their starters last season. I think Zeke Berry's the one guy that could possibly, kind of compete with McBurrows. Cody Jones is there too, but I think the difference between McBurrows and Berry is a little extreme right now. Berry's more like a safety rather than a nickel in my eyes right now. So I would say McBurrows, from today, I would say he's the starting nickel. And because they had such great success with Sainristil the last few seasons, I don't see why they wouldn't keep playing a guy at nickel in their defense. It works so well for them.
So other secondary departures, Keon Sabb, who rotated at safety quite a bit, pretty talented in the 2022 class, who's high 4-star. He has transferred out. Also transferring out was a guy I didn't really see who was redshirting last year. That was Cameron Calhoun. Caden Kolsar graduated. He was, I think, a former walk-on, but who got some backup play. And German Green also got some backup play. He graduated. Oh, and then Amorian Walker switched to the wide receiver room. Yeah. Have I missed anybody?
Nope, that sounds right.
There's a couple of freshman recruits to the secondary. I think 2 of them are corners, Josiah, but I didn't really see any of. Well, I saw 2 of them I think are going to be corners, Josiah Edmond and Jeremiah Lowe. And I saw one guy who I think is going to be, well, he was playing safety. He was playing strong safety in the spring game. That's Jacob Oden. But I think he's going to redshirt. I think they got a bunch of dudes in this room.
I think so too.
The dudes that they bring back are Makari Page and Rod Moore. Makari Page is, of course, their free safety, but Rod Moore is like he's undergoing I think his second surgery the offseason or something like that. What's up with him?
Yeah, he got dealt a tough hand. He came back. He could have gone to the NFL. Probably would have drafted. I don't really know when, but maybe early day 3. But yeah, he decided to come back and got hurt in practice. So I think as of right now, his season's probably going to be scratched. It's possible you see him in like the later part of the year, like if they make the playoff, but they're expecting to not have him for the entire regular season right now.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, they really big blows, kind of especially with the similar to like the linebacker room. They thought, okay, we have these 2 great guys, like the defensive tackles with Graham and Grant. They thought the exact same thing was going to be had with the safety room with Rod Moore and Makari Page. And unfortunately, with Rod Moore going down, they really now had to find a new guy to replace him.
Well, I mean, I was telling anybody who could listen, the whole reason that Michigan won the national championship game against the whole reason that Michigan dealt Washington their only loss of the year was because they had 4 safeties who could cover between Page, Moore, Johnson, and Sabb, and that was it. Like, if you want to beat Washington, you have to have a bunch of safeties who can cover, because that's how they beat you. Is they throw to the middle of the field, because that's how they do it. And so, I know I saved this one to last, but like, I'm really curious about how Michigan's safety room plays out. They bring back, Page, of course, but if Moore is a scratch, and then I didn't see Quentin and Sabb is out, Sainristil is out. Quentin Johnson, I didn't see in the spring game. What's his story?
Yeah, so Johnson was looking for an extra year of eligibility. He was also kind of teetering with the NFL drafts, decided to come back. I don't think there's any really story there why he didn't play in the spring game, but from what I've seen, I think it's going to be Makari Page and Quentin Johnson as the 2 starting safeties next season.
Okay. Other guys that I was seeing, while I'm on the subject of why didn't I see that guy, the 2023 4-star Brandon Hillman, who played a little bit last year. I'm not sure if he played enough to burn his red shirt or not, but he got his feet wet at least. I didn't see him in the spring game. What's his story?
I don't know why he didn't play in the spring game. I have to assume it's because of an injury, but I definitely see him as a top depth piece at the safety position behind Makari Page next season. But I actually have no idea why he didn't play in the spring game. I was wondering that too when I got to the stadium, why he wasn't playing.
So, between all the departments, I listed two dudes who transferred out, one dude who went to the NFL, a bunch of dudes two dudes who graduated, one who switched to the wide receiver room, three dudes who were not playing in the spring game. They were getting pretty tight on numbers. And so I was seeing like three walk-ons play pretty extensively in the spring game. I think just like we were talking about with the wide receivers, because they were running tight on bodies. Those were Max Reyes, Nico Andrighetto, which was confusing because they both wear the jersey number 31, and Micah Davis, who wears 37. I don't really think that's because they're seriously part of the rotation. I think it's because, tightness on the numbers, but it does make it sort of difficult to assess because the only other two guys, literally the only other two guys that I saw besides the freshmen that we mentioned earlier, Jacob Oden, were Zeke Berry and Cody Jones. Now, those guys are both, pretty talented. They were 2022 guys. They were both 4 stars. If they're going to play, this is their time to play. Hey, Jake, this is their time to play. What do you think about those guys?
Yeah, I like Zeke Berry. I think I agree. I think it's his time to play. I think they might have a rotation with him and Quentin Johnson at one of the safety spots. I think Makari Page is going to be an every down kind of guy. I like him a lot. I like Cody Jones too. I think he's also kind of bit his time and he's coming in. He has good coverage skills. He has good kind of awareness. And it's really just been looking for a spot on the depth chart since his team was pretty old and they did keep bringing in some transfers. I think Jaden Magnum, the guy they brought in from Michigan State, is an interesting guy that you can look at the safety position. Guy who played some in the Big Ten, bring him over from Sparty over here to the Wolverines will be interesting. And you have Brandon Hillman, as you said, and that's a kind of another guy that they have. So they have a lot of names. I think outside of Makari Page and Quentin Johnson and Zeke Berry, I think other guys are definitely capable of playing, and they might go with another big rotation of guys outside of just Makari Page pretty much playing every single down. But they have a lot of guys in that room that are all capable of playing. It just depends on the consistency aspect of it, the coverage skills, and as you said, right, how important the safety position is for college football, especially with Michigan's team last season, with those guys just being such a big anchor at the back half of the secondary. What are they going to do next season? And we're just going to have to see if they go with 3 guys or they go with 6.
Shoot, I had Mangum transferring out of Michigan State in my database, but I forgot to flag him into Michigan. Did I forget anybody else?
No, that was it.
Mangum was playing free safety at Michigan State. Do you think he competes with Page for that job, or is he just a backup, or how do you think he fits in?
I think, given at least from what I've seen with Makari Page, I don't necessarily think he competes for the starting job. Will he play a lot? I definitely can see that. Especially back there, they definitely need bodies. If Makari Page goes down, Magnum, I think, is that guy who's going to come right back in. But I think they're just going to kind of experiment with what they have. But whether they have the versatility of Page or Magnum to play both of them, I don't really know. But for right now, I definitely see him being with a 3 or 4 piece on the depth chart because of what he's done at Michigan State and his experience playing in the Big Ten already.
Well, it definitely explains why they were willing to go after a guy from across the state.
Exactly.
I mean, it's sort of getting tight on bodies here, without more. God, that really sucks about him.
It makes things difficult, especially losing him before the season, or even before really the spring game even started. Definitely not a great start to the 2024 season.
Since we have like a minute or two of extra time, I wonder if you could, for the benefit of our listeners, can you run down what exactly Wink Martindale's history is with Michigan? Because, how is it that he structured Michigan's defense while he was in the NFL? Yeah,
so Wink Martindale's history, it really is about his system, starting, being with the Ravens. He had Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter working under him. And he kind of had this scheme going. And then when Mike McDonald got poached, with Jim and John Harbaugh being brothers, they always were kind of in coordination with each other, talking back and forth with each other. And because Wink was the defensive coordinator back in 2020, going into 2021, Jim Harbaugh asked about Mike McDonald, and McDonald agreed to come over to Michigan for 1 season before he went back to the NFL. And you bring in Jesse Minter, another guy who was part of Wink's system. They all do kind of the same thing. They all it's a pro-style defense. Everyone knows where they are at all times. Wink is a little more aggressive than McDonald and Minter Minter wasn't necessarily as aggressive, but he had a lot of different schemes for how they rushed the passer. But in general, it really comes down to looking at a pro-style defense where everyone knows their position. They like to disguise a lot of different things to the defense, like to show you a lot of different looks, but really they all kind of do the exact same thing. And it's about that kind of defense that's made it work for so long between these now 3 coordinators. And when Wink, was let go or decided to depart from the Giants, whatever the actual story was, why he then kind of took over at the spot at Michigan, because it really is a very similar style defense to what these players have been playing the last few years.
Well, Jake Singer, once again, of Maize n Brew, could not be more happy to have you on. This has been a great discussion. Thanks for pushing back, too, on some of our opinions. Once again, Jake Singer of WCBN Radio, also the Big Ten Network Plus. Yeah, we could not be more excited to play against Michigan this year, against these Big Ten opponents. Definitely helps heal the sting of our old conference being dead now. But yeah, and we're very excited to have you on the show. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Thank you guys so much. Can't wait to see you guys here, maybe in the snow, but in November. It'll be a definitely different atmosphere than maybe your Oregon team might be used to on a normal day-to-day basis.
No joke.
Oregon's had a good time in the big house in the past.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Definitely, those tickets are definitely climbing, and the tailgate spots are definitely getting filled up. So I know my parents are looking to come out that weekend specifically too. So definitely, if you're looking to come out, definitely recommend getting on that sooner rather than later. It'll be a really fun one to watch.
Awesome. Good to hear. Glad to hear. And Hithla Day of Addicted to Quack, as always, thanks for all the work you put into these.
It was my pleasure. Good talking to you, Jake.
Good talking to you as well.
All right, and quack, quack.